Trucks carrying fruit, nuts and honey across the line of control that divides disputed Kashmir after 6 decades. Confidence-building measures creating trade links between the two sides, or getting the civil society on both sides to take over resolving the Kashmiri issue. This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Sahil Rahman. It is not business as usual, but it is business for the first time in 60 years that brings with it fresh hopes of easing decades of tension between India and Pakistan. A road linking the cities of Srinagar on the Indian side and Muzaffarabad on the Pakistani side has been opened. The trade link follows other confidence-building measures introduced in Kashmir in recent years, which include the opening of rail and bus links. The governments of India and Pakistan hope that these steps will bolster the 4-year-old peace talks, which have recently come under strain, as Zaina Awad reports.
Things may finally be looking up for these traders. A new market has opened up for them after being closed for over 60 years. And that market is on the Pakistani side, a fact that's unthinkable to some, but that's been made possible by the opening of a highway linking Indian-controlled and Pakistani-controlled Kashmir to each other.
Before the partition in 1947 and when India and Pakistan were one country, trade used to thrive. Traders are really happy with the reopening of this route after almost 6 decades. We believe this will end the hatred between the two countries.
The highway will make possible the free movement of trade and people across one of the most strategic and sensitive borders in this region, an area that's long been the site of tension, which recently spilled over into open violence. This became the face of cities across Indian-controlled Kashmir in August of this year. Scenes of regular clashes between Indian police and Muslim demonstrators. Thousands took to the streets to protest government policies, some even calling for Kashmiri independence. These scenes were repeated, often violently, for months. And the newly opened highway, Pakistani and Indian officials hope, could also pave a way out of conflict and towards economic prosperity.
Even though these two entities perhaps have to remain separate for some time, but the boundary between this, depicted by the line of control, can be made irrelevant, and both people and goods should be able to travel across this with ease and convenience. We are beginning to see some progress being made, and as talks develop, situation normalizes, conditions will be made more easy for a final resolution of this problem.
But it remains to be seen, once the celebrations subside, whether the bridge will also open the path to a sustainable political solution in a conflict that's been raging for decades. Zaina Awad for Inside Story.
Well, joining me now are our guests here in Doha, Farhan Mojahid Jak. He's an assistant professor of international affairs at Qatar University. In Delhi, India, Ashok Ban. He's a senior advocate at the Supreme Court of India and convener of the Kashmir Committee. And in Charlottesville, Virginia, USA, Michael Crapon. He's a co-founder of the think tank, the Stimson Center, and directs the South Asia program there. Michael, can I start with you? How significant is this opening of the line of control and trade between the two halves of Kashmir?
Well, if it's a mere device to take some pressure out of the situation and the trade just dribbles out a little bit at a time, then it's not significant at all. If instead it's the beginning of a flood of trade, the regularization of trade, the expansion of trade across this Kashmir divide, then it can be very significant.
How would you assess that comment made by Michael Crapon, Ashok Ban in Delhi?
I have a feeling that it's very significant so far as the emotions of both the populations on this part of Kashmir and across Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. It's not the question of only the practical aspect of its economy or economic benefits being shared by both sides. It's more of an emotional affinity between the two sides which have been divided by line of control. And for the first time in 60 years past, the hostility between the two regions has been only on account of this, and I think this is the first step towards the emotional reunion of both the Kashmirs.
Would you agree with that, Farhan Chak in Doha? It's an emotional reunion of both Kashmirs.
I think to a certain point that's accurate. However, if the past is any indication, then this, as the professor earlier mentioned, will probably result in a failure, because essentially the Kashmiri voice, which demands its self-determination, is being attempted to be pacified by these tactics. And like the professor also mentioned, if this is a legitimate attempt at opening the floodgates of trade, then we could definitely well see some improvement. However, if it is just a tactic at pacifying Kashmiri's aspirations of releasing themselves from this occupation, then it's going to be nothing more than a tactic, and it will be failed miserably.
But of course the issue of Kashmir has been a political hot potato for, what, 6 decades now. But do you think this is a step forward in trying to improve the ongoing, perhaps social and political situation, and allowing Kashmiris to make decisions for themselves and to start dialogue both with their own Indian government, if they're on the Indian side, or certainly with the Pakistani authorities on the Pakistani side?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that the Indian government is not their government. Kashmiris reject that in entirety. Irrespective of how whimsical and how fanciful most Indian politicians like to believe, Kashmir has resolutely declared itself an integral part of, not of India, but of itself. So that is a key point to keep into consideration, that this dispute is a trilateral dispute. It's not a bilateral dispute. The stakeholders involved are Pakistan, are India, and are Kashmiris. And Kashmiris fundamentally are the #1 disputant to this problem.
Well, you're a Kashmiri, but so is Ashok Barn in Delhi. Ashok, would you actually agree with that point of view? India has a certainly different stance and position on the identity of Kashmir.
I have a slightly disagreement with my friend. Kashmir enjoys a distinct status even within the Indian society. It has a distinct constitution, and it has a constitutional guarantee also enshrined in the Constitution of India. It has a separate flag, it has a separate constitution. That means that Kashmir is not being treated at par with the rest of the states in India strictly in the sense of constitutionality or its distinct entity. Kashmir has not merged with India as such. Kashmir has only acceded to India.
Kashmir has never acceded to India, #1, Sahil, if you allow me to interject. Kashmiris have never accepted that. It was illegitimate. And even before, the problem of the crisis starts in 1846 with the illegal sale of the Kashmiri land, its people and its buildings by the overlord British to a family, to a non-Kashmiri family. That's the origins of the conflict, and that's in 1846. Now, the alleged ascension, there is a lot of credible data that speaks highly of this irregularity, that the ascension is illegitimate, the Kashmiris don't respect it, they don't abide by it, and as the allegedly August 15th Indian Celebrations Day that were supposed to take place in Srinagar, we can see very well what happened that day at Lal Chowk, when over 500,000 people were chanting Loshe Pakistan. So, and then they were saying Happy Slavery Day. I think that's an indication the people are representing themselves as great Indian writers and activists, and mainstream Indian media outlets have been projecting that the people are speaking for themselves.
Well, let's just get let's get Ashok Barn in on this.
Sure.
So you've had your say there just for the moment, Farhan. Ashok Barn, what do you have to say to what Farhan Chak is saying?
See, let me tell my friend, possibly he's an expatriate Kashmiri, because the ground realities on the Kashmir are slightly different from what is perceived by expatriates all over. I am a native of Kashmir. If it was an indigenous movement, then I should not have been out in Delhi. I am part of Kashmir civilization. So therefore, I don't term it as an indigenous movement for right to self-determination. Within the concept of self-determination, even me and my community comes in. And the first fault of the Kashmiri indigenous movement is that they have hounded out an indigenous community which has 5,000 years of its history, and there is no answer for this by even the separatists or even the expatriates who are lobbying outside for so-called right to self-determination.
Well, let me bring in Michael Crapon. Let me bring in Michael Crapon here with what you've said, sir.
Number two, let me make a point.
Okay,
let me make my point. That right of self-determination is not available to Kashmir because in the UN concept of jurisprudence, there is no right of self-determination.
That's absolutely inaccurate.
A state which has exceeded Indian Union. Yeah, Indian Union. Second, that which of the self they want to determine. Kashmir alone is not Jammu and Kashmir. Jammu and Kashmir has Ladakh. Jammu and Kashmir has Jammu. You have seen the uprising in Jammu this time. Kashmir has distinct populations. They have Gujars, they have Shias, they have Kashmiri Pandits. Which of the self they want to determine? Can my friend explain which of the self is to be determined? Only few lakhs of people cannot determine the self of whole of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Then Gilgit-Baltistan is also part of it. Azad Kashmir is part of it. Then which of the self they want to determine? It's a misplaced notion legally, logically and politically.
Well, let me just bring in Michael Crapon here. You've heard both sides there, Michael.
Yeah.
Obviously, you just have to mention the history of Kashmir and how far it goes back into the Indus Valley as well and up in the north to understand that sometimes opening a trade route isn't going to actually solve the inherent problems that the region faces there.
Well, I don't want to go so far back in history, but I do want to take you back, Sohail, 3 years, when the leaders of India and Pakistan agreed to allow some movement across the Kashmir divide for divided families. And buses went back and forth. They're still going back and forth, but it is a trickle. It is a trickle. Very few people have availed themselves of this opportunity. And I think there's a lesson to be learned here. Because if we are going to allow this bitterly divided place to move toward a healing of its many, many peoples, and this is a checkerboard. There are so many different pieces of the old princely state of Jammu and Kashmir. That's one of the reasons why it's so hard to move forward. But if we are going to move forward with trade, unlike the bus service with divided families, it has to be serious. It has to be seriously incremental. Trade has to occur on a broad front every single day, not just 2 days a week, not just for 21 designated items. There are great opportunities here, in my view.
We shall continue this debate
but
shortly.
Not if trade is used.
No, we will actually continue this straight after the break, Michael, because we will be talking about whether business in Kashmir can defuse a crisis, making the borderline insignificant. Do stay with us.